Dopamine fasting sounds like the ultimate reset button. Log off, cut the noise, delete the apps, sit in silence, and your brain will magically heal. That is the promise. But what if this trend is not a biological detox, but a psychological trap? What if the very act of starving yourself from stimulation slowly drains your emotional color instead of restoring it? The dark truth is that many people chasing clarity end up feeling something far colder, a quiet emotional numbness they never signed up for. The appeal makes sense. We live in a world of constant pings, endless scrolling, and hyperstimulation. Your brain feels fried, your attention shattered, your motivation diluted. Dopamine fasting offers a seductive fantasy, a clean slate, a purified mind untouched by cheap pleasure. It feels disciplined, almost heroic. In a culture addicted to excess, deprivation looks like wisdom. But exhaustion can make extreme solutions feel rational, even when they quietly move you toward imbalance. Picture someone who decides to cut everything out. No social media, no music, no podcasts, no junk food, no texting, maybe even limited conversation. At first, it feels powerful. There is a sense of control. But after a few days, something shifts. The world does not feel peaceful. It feels flat. Colors seem dull. Motivation fades. Getting out of bed feels heavier than expected. Instead of sharp focus, there is a creeping emptiness, a low hum of apathy that is hard to explain. Clinically, this state resembles emotional blunting. Emotional blunting is not peace. It is not grounded awareness. It is a reduced capacity to feel both joy and sadness. It is when your emotional range narrows, not because you achieved enlightenment, but because your nervous system has dialed everything down. Forced numbness can masquerade as calm, but underneath it is often a protective shutdown, not a healthy recalibration. Here is the core problem. Dopamine is not a toxin you can flush out through abstinence. It is a fundamental neurotransmitter that drives motivation, curiosity, and engagement. When you attempt to starve your brain of stimulation, it does not celebrate your discipline. It interprets the environment as barren. Instead of resetting your reward system, extreme deprivation can trigger a compensatory dampening of it. What you experience as clarity may actually be your brain conserving energy in response to perceived scarcity. When you suddenly remove most sources of stimulation, your brain does not interpret it as a wellness experiment. On a biological level, it reads the shift as scarcity. For most of human history, low stimulation meant low opportunity, low resources, and potential danger. The nervous system adapts by conserving energy. Motivation drops. Exploration slows. Risk-taking decreases. Subjectively, this does not feel like a spiritual reset. It feels heavy, flat, and strangely similar to the early fog of depression. There is a crucial psychological difference between delayed gratification and avoidance. Delayed gratification means you tolerate discomfort now for a meaningful reward later. Avoidance means you withdraw from friction because it feels overwhelming. Extreme dopamine fasting often blurs this line. It can become an intellectual shield, a way to justify stepping back from relationships, challenges, and ambition under the banner of self-optimization. What looks like discipline may quietly be retreat. This is where the concept of anhedonia becomes relevant. Anhedonia is the reduced ability to feel pleasure from activities that once felt rewarding. It is one of the core symptoms of depressive disorders. When you chronically suppress stimulation, especially in rigid and extreme ways, you mimic this pattern. You teach your brain that enjoyment is suspicious, that pleasure is a threat. Over time, the system adapts by lowering responsiveness, and joy becomes harder to access even when you want it back. Another hidden cost is the narrative that all pleasure equals cheap dopamine. Not all rewards are shallow. A good conversation, a satisfying workout, building something meaningful, these are not neurological junk food. When you start demonizing everyday sources of reward, you erode intrinsic motivation. The brain relies on small, consistent rewards to maintain momentum. Remove them all, and you do not become superior. You become underfueled. Ironically, the obsession with controlling dopamine can morph into a new addiction. You begin tracking behaviors, policing inputs, fearing stimulation. Every scroll feels like a failure. Every spike feels dangerous. This hyperfixation creates its own compulsive loop, one built on anxiety and control. Instead of being free from dopamine, you become preoccupied with it. The mind that wanted liberation ends up trapped in a stricter, more fragile cage. To understand why extreme dopamine fasting backfires, we need to look at the actual neuroscience. The mesolimbic dopamine pathway, often called the reward circuit, connects areas like the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. This system is not designed just for pleasure. Its primary job is to help you notice what matters and move toward it. Reducing it to a simple pleasure switch ignores how deeply it is woven into motivation, learning, and survival. Dopamine is better described as the molecule of wanting, not liking. It fuels anticipation, curiosity, and the drive to pursue goals. When you feel excited about starting a project or chasing an opportunity, that surge is about motivation, not the final reward itself. The actual enjoyment of a reward involves other systems, including opioids and serotonin. So, when people say they want to eliminate dopamine spikes, they are often talking about shutting down the very engine that pushes them forward. There is also a difference between baseline dopamine and short bursts, known as phasic spikes. Baseline levels influence your general mood and drive throughout the day. Phasic spikes happen in response to cues, novelty, or progress. Extreme fasting does not magically repair receptors or multiply them. If anything, chronically lowering stimulation can drag down baseline levels, leaving you less energized overall. You cannot punish your system into becoming more sensitive. The brain operates on homeostasis. It constantly adjusts to maintain balance. When you abruptly remove stimulation, the brain adapts to the new environment. If it perceives a prolonged famine of rewarding input, it may downregulate receptor sensitivity or reduce dopaminergic firing to conserve resources. This is not a moral judgment by your brain. It is a survival algorithm. The result, however, can feel like emotional flattening and reduced motivation. A healthier route involves the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term decision-making. Strengthening top-down regulation is different from starving the reward system. When you build cognitive control through habits, reflection, and intentional choices, you are not shutting dopamine off. You are directing it. That distinction matters. One approach weakens engagement with life. The other trains you to channel your drive with precision and purpose. In the real world, extreme restriction rarely lasts. Sooner or later, willpower cracks. The person who cut out everything suddenly dives back into high-stimulation activities, hours of scrolling, junk food, binge-watching, impulsive spending. The rebound feels intense because the brain, deprived for days or weeks, responds with a powerful spike. But what follows is not balance. It is a crash, deeper fatigue, stronger guilt, and a harsher inner critic than before the fast ever started. Emotional numbness also reshapes social life. Human connection is inherently stimulating. Conversations are unpredictable. Relationships require effort, vulnerability, and emotional swings. When someone tries to eliminate most sources of dopamine, they often pull away from people too. At first, it feels peaceful. Over time, it becomes isolation, and isolation does not create resilience. It quietly amplifies anxiety and makes re-entry into social environments feel overwhelming. There is also a subtle cognitive bias at play. In productivity culture, emotional flatness can be mistaken for superiority. If you are not distracted, not excited, not reactive, you must be disciplined. But equating dullness with intelligence is a trap. A fully functioning brain experiences a wide emotional range. Curiosity, enthusiasm, even healthy frustration are signs of engagement. When you suppress all of that, you are not evolving. You are narrowing your psychological bandwidth. Another overlooked concept is reward prediction error. This is the brain's learning signal, the difference between what you expect and what actually happens. When outcomes are better than expected, dopamine spikes reinforce the behavior. When they are worse, the system adjusts. If you flatten your environment to near zero stimulation, you reduce meaningful variation. Without variation, there is less learning. You unintentionally dampen the very mechanism that helps you adapt and grow. Over time, a chronically understimulated brain becomes rigid. It adapts to simplicity and low input. Then when normal complexity returns, busy schedules, social demands, unexpected stress, it feels like chaos. Instead of being stronger, the person feels fragile. Small stressors hit harder. Focus breaks more easily. What was supposed to build resilience ends up shrinking tolerance. The mind becomes less flexible, not more powerful. Maybe the real issue is not that your brain needs to be starved, but that it needs to be guided. The fasting metaphor is flawed from the start. You do not heal a complex system by depriving it of all input. A more accurate frame is stimulus curation. Instead of eliminating stimulation, you become selective. You choose what deserves your attention and what does not. The goal is not emptiness. It is intentional engagement. There is a powerful psychological shift when you replace low-friction, high dopamine habits with high-friction, high-reward activities. Scrolling requires almost no effort and gives instant novelty. Writing, training, building a skill, or having a hard conversation demand energy and patience, but the reward is deeper and more stable. Effort-based engagement strengthens motivation because dopamine becomes tied to progress and mastery, not passive consumption. Neuroscience supports this approach. Dopamine receptors can become more responsive when stimulation is paired with effort, meaning, and challenge. When you pursue difficult goals that align with your values, dopamine release reinforces persistence. The brain learns that effort predicts growth. This is very different from sitting in forced emptiness, hoping your system will magically reset. Purpose-driven action recalibrates motivation without suppressing your emotional range. A practical recalibration starts with biological anchors. Morning sunlight helps regulate circadian rhythms and supports healthy dopamine signaling. Physical exertion increases baseline mood and motivation. Consistent, restorative sleep stabilizes neurotransmitter balance. These foundations create a stable baseline without extreme restriction. You are not punishing your brain. You are supporting it with predictable, high-quality inputs that strengthen resilience over time. The final shift is identity. You are not someone who must constantly defend your brain from dopamine. You are the architect of your drive. Dopamine is not the enemy, it is the fuel. Emotional range, desire, and ambition are features of a highly functioning mind. When you learn to direct that energy toward meaning instead of numbing it into silence, you stop chasing emptiness and start building a life that actually feels alive.